Go. All right. Good
Look
morning.
out. Good morning.
We're coming on, Larry. It's good to see you. Today we have my
Thanks for having
friend
me.
Larry Ryback with me, and we're going to talk about what he's been doing at Jim and Nick's. He's currently at Jim and Nick's, and I've known Larry for quite some time, and we've had the pleasure of working together a few times. And so to get started, Larry, what I'd really love to do is just find out a little bit about you. You know, I know that you're kind of a restaurant lifer like me.
Yeah.
Where did you grow up, and how did you end up being in the restaurant business?
Yeah, I grew up in southern New Jersey, about 10 miles outside of Philadelphia in the Cherry Hill area. And started in the restaurant business when I was like 15 years old, washing dishes in a little Italian restaurant there. And, it helped give you spending money through high school and pay for things like books through college. And then, I went to college for business. And when I got out of college, it was just something I decided I really wanted to do. Something I enjoyed, the entire time I was in it, through high school and then through college. But then just decided I loved it and wanted to make a career out of it. And so it's just kind of parlayed my education into my career path.
Kind of it's a very typical story, for a lot of us. It's like, I was a dishwasher at 15 as well. Yeah. And when you talk about, it's funny when you talk about jobs that people remember most people remember their restaurant jobs, like the best times in your work life, for me have always been like in a kitchen for the most part. I remember all the stupid stuff we used to do and, all the dumb shit that happened. And, I don't know. It's funny how that seems to be a common thread.
No question. Some of the craziest, things you couldn't make up. Just the craziest things that have ever happened in my life have happened in my teen years and my 20s in the restaurant business, because you're working with your friends, you're all young, you're all immature. It's such a social environment. It's just, it was a blast.
I was reading Anthony Bourdain's book again, recently. I just picked it off my shelf. Every time I think about Anthony Bourdain, it just makes me sad because it's crazy. But his first book was so good because it talks about all these, restaurant shit and how he was just so arrogant. And there's one part of it that was really funny. He was like, I took to he wore like a katana sword around in the store. Yeah, I just remember people doing crazy shit like that all the time. And I don't know. It's always really funny to me to think about that.
It attracts interesting people for sure.
It definitely does. So you've been at Jim and Nick's for a while now. I want to again, you also have family in the restaurant industry, right? Your brother is in the restaurant industry as well.
Two brothers. Yeah, two brothers. I've been to Jim and Nick's for a year, but I have two brothers in the restaurant business, one younger, one older. And we've been in the restaurant business our whole lives. It's like one, the older brother got me into it. I got my younger brother into it. And we've worked together at a few different times. And actually, my two brothers actually work together now in the same company, not directly.
Oh, no way.
Yeah,
I knew he had one, and I'm sure you've told me this before, but I was thinking, I knew he had one brother that was, like a C.E.O kind of person like you, right? He's an operator.
He's my older brother is a VP of operations for First Watch in the Northeast. My brother Stan, and then my brother Mike I'm not sure I have the exact titles right, but like an area director, a multi-unit guy. Just kind of growing out the Chicago market for First Watch. I think they just opened their first restaurant and getting ready to open a bunch more. And he's been with them for just a little over a year. It's interesting because my older brother and I worked together for 10 years at Champs. We were GMs and we were regionals together, RVPs together. So we didn't really, we didn't work directly together, but same company, similar jobs. So it's interesting now to see my older brother working with my younger brother. So it's pretty cool.
Most family couldn't do that. That's
right. I don't know that we could either if it was like, every day, shoulder to shoulder,
I attempted to work with my wife for a while back. We almost killed each other. She actually helps me now with a lot of stuff, but it was probably the biggest mistake I ever made.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know about that.
Good to have some separation for sure.
List is pretty long. Yeah. what else was I going to ask you? So tell me a little bit about your career. You just mentioned you were at Champs. I knew about that. Obviously, we're going to talk about that for a second, but kind of take me through the high level.
Sure. In the mid '90s, Champs Americana was growing, which was a great concept. Really, one of the first sports bars of its kind that did big box, lots of big screen TVs, but really good quality scratch food. And so they were growing big time. In the mid '90s, as I said, I joined in '95 and ran their fourth restaurant in Edison, New Jersey, about an hour north of where I grew up. And I ran that restaurant as a GM for a couple of years, and they moved me to Chicago. I ran one in Schaumburg, Illinois for 2 years, opened another one down in Oak Brook, Illinois. And then a multi-unit operator for them on the East Coast. So I ran the East Coast from Jersey down to Fort Lauderdale, and then became their first RVP in I think 2002 or 2003. And I supervised all the restaurants, basically all the restaurants west of the Mississippi. So at that time it was like, I don't know, 26, 27 restaurants or something like that. So I was there for 10 years. And got an opportunity to join the founder, who's starting a new concept called Redstone American Grill. And I left Champs in 2005 and joined Dean Blahos as the chief operating officer for Redstone, which is really just an amazing concept. Another just great concept, great group of people, lots of fun. So I was there from 2005 until 2010. And was then part of the turnaround team that was hired for Kona Grill back in 2010, sorry. And that was a fun, exciting turnaround, and that opened other doors for me. So I from there, I moved on to become the chief operating officer for P.F. Chang's. And I did that for a few years, and P.F. Chang's at that point the parent company owned True Food Kitchen. So I moved over from Chang's to True Food Kitchen to be their president and chief operating officer. And from there, it kind of led me to my first CEO gig. And so I've been a CEO since 2016. Been a lot of fun. I think the operations experience that I've had, gives me a natural, kind of a bias toward all things ops, but has really, I'm grateful for it because it gives me a perspective on how hard it is to run restaurants, but how important solid operations are to being a successful restaurant company.
I want to take one step back in your history to when you and I met. We met when you mentioned you were at Redstone. First of all, I mean, Champs was really an amazing concept. I remember the first time I went to one. I lived in Columbus, Ohio. I don't know if you knew that. And I went to, I think it was the first week, and I don't know if I've told you this story before. First week, first month of the Champs in Columbus, Ohio, and it was just going insane. First of all, the location was fantastic. The place was crazy. I'll never forget it because I was sitting there and I saw the GMs all stand next to each other, and they were looking at the receipts coming out of the register. They were running a report, and they all looked at each other like, oh, they high-fived each other like crazy because the sales were so crazy. But I had no idea, of course, who was behind it. But the thing that was so different was obviously the food. First of all, the facility was first rate. Everything about it was built really well, and people didn't do that at the time, or very few people. You wouldn't pour a lot of dough into a sports bar and prove that concept worked. And then we met when David Gronkin, who was my friend and mentor, convinced me after he had been was the CEO at Famous Dave's, went to Redstone as well. At the time, they were really thinking about growing, and so they hired a CEO. And he said, "Look, you're probably the only person I know that might be able to get along with Dean." I'd never heard of Dean other than some people around town. So actually, I went into that meeting with Dean cold. Like I had never heard of him other than David saying, well, this guy's a little bit difficult to get along with, was kind of how I put it. It was how he put it. He's eccentric, he's smart and all that. which was just hilarious. But you know, you and I've talked about this a bunch of times because I think we both learned a lot. You know, I was only with Dean for a few years, but just hanging around with him. What would you say was kind of the thing that you learned most out of that experience of working with Dean at Champs and then at Redstone?
Just unyielding standards. I mean, I've known Dean now for 25 years. And certainly in different capacities. I was a kid as a GM where he scared me to death in the beginning of my career. And then, you know, I obviously grew my career and I knew him in different ways, or the relationship changed a little bit. And then I worked for him at Redstone and, you know, started kind of as you start with Dean, you start as an employee. And then, you know, if things go well, you can become more of a partner. I think the guy's amazing, man. He's crazy in a good way, but just exacting standards and the commitment to doing things right. That's probably the thing I learned most from Dean. And he's just relentless. His attention to detail, his desire to provide the very best for his guests is just unparalleled. I think we saw that in the Champs concept, and he was always a fan of Houston's, right? So he took that sort of level of discipline and those exacting standards, and then tried to apply that to a sports bar concept, and then Redstone, which was a little bit closer to what a Houston's would be. So probably just that passion for doing things right. You know, he's very bigger than life personality, a guy that gets up out of bed every day and wants to conquer the world. So that just sort of that passion for the business, that lust for life, that desire and commitment to do things right, period, was probably what I got most from Dean, aside from a ton of great stories and lots and lots of laughter that will make your belly hurt.
Yeah. You and I've talked about this before, because I've tried to get him to do some things here and there. You know, I asked him one time, hey, would you come to Chicago to the restaurant show, because I was doing like a panel thing, and he goes, yeah, maybe I'll do that. And he thought, because no one's ever I feel like in his career no one's ever given him the due that he's kind of deserved, really, because whatever reason he just hasn't. But I would echo what you said about learning, that those same kind of things. And I've noticed that about you, in your later iterations at different places that you've been, adopting a standard that's probably very high, that people don't really expect. I mean, he kind of taught me to view, he never wanted to talk about cost at first, which is good and bad. I mean, it's bad, obviously, because you got to get to what something costs at some point. But much like I was lucky enough to have an architect mentor when I was very young, who was really an amazing person. And they always said, when you're working on a design or concept or whatever you're trying to do, don't think about what it costs when you're working on it. Think about what makes everything perfect. And Dean and I had a number of conversations about like sitting in every seat in the restaurant, because I went to numbers with him. Okay, well, we got to get, how many seats are we trying to get in here, and tried to churn it into a mathematical computation. And he was like, yeah, cut that out. You got all frustrated. Stop doing that. Yeah. Let's first figure out how to make it feel amazing, and then we'll back into the numbers after that. And, that was a completely different, kind of perspective. Every single restaurant company I'd ever worked for pretty much always started with numbers, and then you kind of backed into it, which was really hurtful to creative process. And I was saying, people that have asked me about you since then, I've always said, well, I think you're going to be surprised that he'll show up with a much higher standard than maybe what you're used to. He's going to be expecting the operators to really be concentrating on experience a whole lot more than maybe what you would expect for somebody. And as you work at fast casual brands as well, that's what they later said. I have friends that have worked with you in different capacities, and they all said, yeah, you were right. Larry really came with a high level of standards, and it really helped their brands. So with all that,
I'm sure I got a lot of that from Dean, and just being, I spent my formative years in, 15 years in those two brands, from my mid 20s up till my, until I was 40. So it certainly shapes the way you look at things. But I also think people want to be on a winning team, or they want to be part of something that is, that does commit to the standard of excellence, And then I just think from a management standpoint, I always find it easier to manage in the black and white and not the gray. So if you want to know what the standard is, well, what does great look like? So I can certainly help define what the standard of excellence is for someone, so they can always compare what's currently happening, whatever it is, food or service or cleanliness or whatever, with whatever that standard is. But it's our jobs to close that gap. And I just always found it's easier, and it's you can be a little bit more clear with people and a little bit more direct with people when you're all aligned to what the standard of excellence is, because you just measure, how you're doing versus it. And if you're missing it, well, that's not okay. I think operators have a tendency to dabble in the gray a little bit too much, and they accept things that they shouldn't accept. And then that comes through in the guest experience.
Wow, that's a really good way to put that. That's real interesting. It was reminding me of a conversation that I had with Dean one time. He was all frustrated about, and we've joked about this 100 times, about the thickness of the crust on the key lime pie.
Yeah, sure.
It's driving him crazy, because everywhere we'd go, he loved to go to the one Houston's that we went to in Palm Beach near his house. And they always had really thick ones. And he's like, why can't they do this? And I'm like, well, they're trying, why not? And he goes, I can't tell them anymore. I'm like, yes, you can. He goes, okay. So then he would, you kind of talk him into it, but that's the level that he was thinking. I mean, there's no gray area. So when you were just saying that, I really like the way you said that, not dabbling in the gray area. Because I think that's where a lot of people live, right? I mean,
yeah.
Well,
it's comfortable, and it's, nobody likes to have a tough conversation.
Yeah,
I don't. I mean, nobody
even
does,
with
right?
yourself.
Right. I think, but it's when you're nice, when you're black and white like that, and everybody understands like where you're coming from. Mm-hmm. You're not having the tough conversation because you want to make somebody feel bad, or you want to be a jerk, or whatever the deal is. You're having a tough conversation about a current situation, how it compares to the standard of excellence, and why it's important. And again, I think everyone wants to be part of a winning team. Some of the relationships I have with people that are the strongest ones, or the longest lasting ones, are ones that started rough, because we had to calibrate on what good looks like and what that standard is. And because I won't back down from it. I made an impact on people that I didn't even realize I was making. So it's really rewarding in that regard. Like, so you have some bumps in the road early, or it's, you have some uncomfortable conversations, but they're really meaningful and lasting, and you end up joking about them, years later. So that's probably the biggest thing I took away from my 15 years with those two brands, is just, don't yield. You don't yield on the standard of excellence.
Wow. Yeah. I think that's a great thought, and you said it really well. So thanks for sharing that. And you said you've been at Jim and Nick's for about a year now, and wow, a lot of things have happened in that short period of time. I kind of thought you were there a little bit longer. I guess I knew how long you've been there, but it seems like we've done so much, because you immediately, you reached out to me working on potentially a new prototype, and started talking about possibly going to fast casual. But I was also very impressed with the way you approached that, and not wanting to, go too far too quickly. We want to take measured steps. You've done a lot of things. So before we get into just talking about that, and specifically, you got to Jim and Nick's. I can't imagine you weren't pretty pleased when you found that you had a pretty solid team there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great team. A great team, a great company culture, and a really strong brand. It's always great to inherit something like that, because it's not something that's broken that you got to fix. And yeah, Jim and Nick's had all those things. Just a great team at every level of the organization. I mean, the GMs, the tenured GMs, and the managers in the field, to folks at our office and up, all the way up to my senior team. And they're just really passionate, really committed, good people. That's the other part of it. Like they're really good people. So that was great. I joined in like early January of last year. And I did my first 2 months of really just field training, some kitchen training, and following a number of the multi-unit operators, and just spending time with GMs in the restaurant, just to get a sense of what do we do and how do we do it and why do we do it, and where are we strong and where do we have opportunities to improve and stuff like that. And then COVID hit. That's kind of that's like the needle across the record, and it just really forced us to take pause and evaluate everything that we were doing, to figure out how to survive in an unprecedented time.
Yeah. And you took a lot of actions, and I'm assuming it was probably pretty difficult to figure out what to tackle first, because you're brand new. You get there, you're working the stores a while, and then all of a sudden, the shit hits the fan, and you got to react quickly. What were the things that you kind of felt like, okay, here's what we got to accomplish first? Take me through your thought process.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to be careful with things that would have an impact on the guest experience, first and foremost, because, while you've got to go through and evaluate your cash situation and where you're spending money in every line of your P&L. The worst thing that you can do is do something that's going to compromise your top line and make a tough situation worse. So I wanted to be mindful of that. We knew early on. I knew coming in the door from both my partners on the board side, my board, and then also the senior team, that there was this feeling that the brand had, over time, the menu had gotten too large. Labor costs had crept up, and there's just general, cost creep into the business. So we knew we needed to take kind of a bit of a clinical look at, what had happened over time with costs, and then how do you get the economics back to something that that's closer to what it was when the brand was performing at its best. So we knew it was something we needed to do anyway, but COVID really, it forces you to do that, because if you don't, you're literally going to run out of money and not have a business, which I think we've seen throughout the industry. We have some restaurants that have not only survived, but actually thrived because they took proactive steps to reevaluate their entire business, and then some that just aren't even around anymore. So that situation forced us to really evaluate everything we were doing. And the things that we did first were to focus on menu, to get the menu carefully and thoughtfully down to a size that was more manageable, where we could be faster, we could be more consistent, and improve our COGS. And like a lot of restaurant concepts, over time, menus get bigger and bigger and bigger, but you typically, the old 80-20 rule, the top 20% of your menu items make up 80% of your mix. Well, that was pretty true at Jim and Nick. So it wasn't terribly difficult to make some of those decisions to streamline the menu. And that had a real significant impact on our ability to execute consistently. And it had a big impact on speed, and it had a big impact on COGS. But we also had to look at the labor line. We just developed a completely new labor model. It's a shared tip labor model, which has been tried in the industry before. Yeah. I don't know that anyone's really figured it out. I think we may be the first company to figure it out, knock on wood. And essentially, everyone gets the same rate of pay hourly, and they all share in tips across all revenue channels. And one of the benefits that Jim and Nick's has is that aside from a strong dine-in business, we also do a lot of takeout, and we have drive-throughs. So you have three revenue channels coming into the inside the four walls that have a gratuity stream as well. So that was a big challenge for the organization, and something we really had to spend a lot of time, from first and foremost, getting the modeling right, getting rates of pay right, figuring out what the shared gratuity impact would be on people, and wanted to make sure we were doing the right thing by our people. And that took, several iterations of that model to get there. And then the other thing was really important is we needed to bring people along. And, Jim and Nick's, as I said earlier, has longer tenure at the manager level and at the hourly team member level than any brand I've been associated with. And that's what one of the greatest strengths, if not the greatest strength of the brand, is the culture. And the culture comes largely from the tenure of folks that have been around forever. And so we wanted to be really careful with bringing those folks along. And we felt confident that the model would work financially for our people. We did enough modeling behind it to know that. But we also understood that we were going to change the way people were being compensated. And that always freaks people out. It would freak either of us out. So we spent a lot of time in talking people through that change, and then making sure that, while we were fine tuning that model, we were doing the right thing by our people, right? So if for whatever reason the model caused someone to lose money, anyone in the organization, if it caused them to lose money over what they were making before, we made things right and we made them whole, because we were the ones that were trying to figure it out. And I think because we did that, we earned some trust with them. It's something, if you had one restaurant, that's certainly what you do. Like if you're changing your labor model and you had a team member come up to you and say, look, Larry, I lost, $100 last week because of this labor model change. Well, what would you do? You make it right. You give the person $100. When you have, 41 restaurants, it gets more challenging, but it's just a challenge you have to figure out. It's not, you shouldn't do something different, because the right thing to do is to take care of your people. Anyway, so that was a big change for us. And like I said, it's gone through, over a 6-month period, it's gone through, countless iterations and tweaks. But we're at a good place now where we feel like it's sustainable, and it's a labor model that we're gonna grow with. So it's been great.
Wow.
And then the other big thing that we really did was, and I mentioned earlier, was I think you have to, when something like this happens, a crisis like the pandemic, you have to look at every single expense in the business and challenge it. And it doesn't mean, it's not about cost cutting, right? I think we all agree that you can't cut your way to prosperity. But I think to look at every single line in your general ledger and say, who is this vendor? Who is this supplier? What do we get from them? Why do we use it? Do we need it? Is this the right service, or is this the right product? Is it the right price for that product? And really just take a deep scrubbing of all your financials. And like most older brands, and Jim and Nick's has been around for a long time, and what invariably happens is that you get a little bit of cost creep into the business. It's natural. It just happens over time, but this is sort of that, COVID forces that kind of that Etch-a-Sketch moment where you've got to make sure you really have your arms around what it takes to run your business, because it's important to do that when you don't have a crisis like the pandemic.
Yeah.
It's absolutely essential to do it when you have the pandemic, because you're not going to be around if you don't. And I think, to the credit of my team, the team responded remarkably well to that kind of a direction coming from a CEO who at the time had 2 months in the business. Like, if it wasn't for the pandemic, I think, I certainly wouldn't have moved as fast as we did if not for the pandemic, because I think it's potentially really disruptive and really risky. And I think the pandemic just forced us to do that.
So yeah, so I mean, if there's any good aspect to that, it's that. Certainly, there's a lot of bad. So it allowed you to do those things. Given that it's a casual dining, full service brand, the things that you've done, especially with that labor model, is probably something that you could write a book about. I mean, there's just an immense amount of pain, especially in that segment of the industry. So it's kind of amazing what you've been able to do. Jim and Nick's had a couple of advantages, over a lot of fat or casual dining brands, and that the food itself travels well. Barbecue's kind of already set up for that to a certain extent. A strong takeout business, which certainly helped. You've got a number of locations that do all the locations have a drive-through? Not all, most.
No, not all. Most do, but not everyone. But you're right. That was a definite significant strength with having the drive-through. But then also, I think the job that the team did over the years at cultivating a to-go business. Yeah, you're right. Barbecue travels well, so we have that advantage going for us. But I think Jim and Nick's has this long history of really making takeout important. Like they didn't really look at it as this sort of ancillary thing. It's always been a really important part of the brand, so we were known for that. So between the building that takeout business and then having a drive-through, we were able to fare better than some from a revenue standpoint, because we lost a big chunk of our dine-in business, but our off-premise grew as a result. We also added. We didn't have third-party delivery before the pandemic, which is a whole other can of worms. But that's pretty fun. I lock my dogs out of the office, so they can't creep in here. But adding third-party delivery also helped you mitigate the pressure of losing such a big part of our dining business.
Yeah. I mean, all those topics individually are things that there's a lot of stuff involved in any one of those discussions, but you had to do kind of all of those things at once, as well as you pretty much immediately started talking about adding, changing the technology, adding a lot of new technologies to the business, as well as even considering, hey, let's think about going to a more fast casual format. That probably had to be a scary discussion to have, with the team there. Or were they ready for that, or was that like a wow, what the hell are you talking about?
They had some conversation about it in the past. Nothing really substantive, or didn't have any solid plans to actually do anything. But I think that, and I'm doing this from memory here, I believe they had some conversations about barbecue and the fact that so many great barbecue concepts are fast casual, and it's uncommon to see a full service barbecue concept.
Yeah.
But I think the challenge and what the concern was, and it was a concern of mine too, is the hospitality and guest service is such an important part of our culture and such an important part of our brand, that if you don't have full service, well, you lose that. So, one of the things we really wanted to understand was how to provide a guest experience that is just as special when someone's ordering from a counter as you want it to be when someone is taking your order at the table. So there was a little bit of apprehension there, and it was just something we needed to work through. I think everyone was excited to try it, and I can't say enough about my team and the culture of the organization. Like for the team to embrace this change and so many other changes and things that we wanted and needed to try as a result of COVID, that I am incredibly fortunate to have a team that's that supportive and that willing to try things. Because I had, when we started all this, again, I was with the company like 2 months. So I hadn't had a lot of time to build a lot of, trust and rapport and even credibility with anyone in the organization yet. So there was a little bit of, blind trust, and something I'm, incredibly grateful for.
Yeah, I can't. That had to be tough, especially the new, being new, and saying, hey, we're going to go down this path, and hey, by the way, we're also doing all these other things at the same time. That right. couldn't have been. It certainly wasn't easy. So talk about how we, where we started, because I guess it's been like 10 months, I think, right, since we started, really working on. It first started out as, hey, let's develop a new prototype, and then wisely so, it was, okay, let's see, how do we convert the existing locations. In hindsight, I was like, geez, we should have thought of that day one. Well, wait a minute, we shouldn't be designing a new prototype. Well, it's all great that we want to grow. We should first figure out how to implement these in existing stores. So where did we start, and how did that go from your perspective?
Yeah, I think where we started, and some of this is a blur, honestly, because we had so much going on. But I think where we started was really having the discussion about the guest experience and wanting to make sure that while the service type would change, meaning we'd go from casual dining to fast casual, that the hospitality experience would remain as close to the same as possible, and that's that. So we started the work on defining the guest journey and all those key touch points that we wanted to ensure that were maintained as we changed the service model, which is, I think it's a great exercise to go through, even if you're not changing your service model. It's just a good exercise to go through to think about the guest experience, and again, at all of those key intersects where the guest comes in contact with your brand, and understanding what you want that guest experience to be, and how you deliver it, and who's responsible for it, and how do you hire people that can do that or willing to do that? How do you train for that? How do you make that part of your culture? And so it was a great exercise, and it was for someone who was new at the brand. I mean, me. It was great to go through that with both you from the outside perspective, but also Brian, our president and C.E.O, because he's kind of he's a bit of the brand historian. So to do that work was invaluable for a new CEO. So I think it started there, and then as we designed this new fast casual concept, we wanted to make sure that we were able to address all of those key touch points in the guest journey.
Yeah. Stop right there for a second, because I want to ask you about that. The guest journey, was I thought it was really valuable as well. And I thought it helped us both kind of think about the physicality of it. I've been thinking about it ever since then, wishing that we could have, and maybe we will still figure out a way to continue to mesh that with what we're still doing. It seemed like, and I could be totally off, maybe you've been still working on it to a certain extent, but it seemed like we went through the exercise, we kind of identified the parts, and it was hard, because it brought out a lot of stuff, and just the format of it, looking at it on a bunch of paper, it's hard to follow. I've been trying to think about it since then, like, how can we make that a better format? How do you make a better format to go through a process like that? And then how do you continue to go back to it, and make it more something? I don't know if there's an answer to that, but it's almost like I wish we could revisit it, and say, okay, did we accomplish what we said we were going to do? Honestly, I was looking at it a couple of days ago, and I noticed a few things that we talked about that we didn't really, that we're not doing, or maybe not as well as we could. And I thought, okay, we need to rethink about that. I think Phil sent the other day an email about outside, about delivery. Just, it was a simple one about, overhangs, and at the drive-thru. And we're doing some of those things. We talked about some other things, and maybe they were small, better directional signs outside, doing some other stuff. I don't know that we did as well as we think we did,
Right.
I think that's just one example, but it was making me think about that entire process. A couple of things that came out of that I remember really well was identifying, every single contact point with a team member, and what is that interaction like? Was the team able to transfer that into kind of effective training? Did it help, and how?
Yeah, I think it did in the restaurant that we converted to fast casual. I think it did, because it helped define who we hire in some respects, but mainly how we train and what the expectations are for each position in the restaurant from for hourly or management. So I think it helped in that regard. I think what we haven't gotten to yet is how does that guest journey inform how we train and what we do and what we're focused on in every other restaurant in the system. We just haven't taken it, that step further. And I also think there's an opportunity to go back, even in the restaurant that we converted and the new one that we're getting ready to open, and make sure that we are delivering against all of those things. I think that I agree with you. I think I like the work we did in developing an understanding of what we want that guest journey to be. But I don't think it's something that you can develop and put on the shelf and just say, okay, well, I'm done with it, right? It has to become a part of how you operate and how you live and breathe as a restaurant company.
Yeah, I think there's a secret there that we could figure out. How do you do an exercise like that, and then how do you make it part of what you do, and maybe it forms a purpose and a long-term strategy. While we're talking about that, so we opened one, where you selected one unit that was a newer unit that had only been open for a short period of time, and it was closed for COVID, and then you reopened it as fast casual. We didn't make a huge amount of physical changes to the store. We kind of started off with maybe more grandiose thoughts about how to change it. I thought that what we ended up doing seemed pretty right. It seemed pretty reasonable. We didn't spend a lot of money, but it's different. We've made some improvements. How do you feel about, now that you've had some time to live with it, what we did, and how's it working?
Yeah, I agree. I think it was the right amount of stuff and the right amount of spend. It's interesting because when I go into that restaurant, it's like it's always been that way to me, and it's a similar box in terms of layout as lots of our other restaurants. But when I go into that restaurant, it doesn't look or feel like a casual dining restaurant that was converted to fast casual. It feels like it was built to be that way. So that's a compliment to you. I think you really understood what you were starting with and what we were trying to accomplish, and you're fiscally responsible. And I think we learned a ton. I think it'll continue to evolve as we open other restaurants. And that restaurant's not as busy as I would like. It's never been as busy as I would like. So it hasn't quite tested that facility and our ability to, kind of drive throughput, but feedback's been great. It's interesting, very little negative guest feedback about the change in service model. It's almost none. And we'll get some that are, older folks that want to have a sit down experience, or they're just not as accustomed to, ordering in a line. But for the most part, younger people, when I say younger, I don't mean like young, I mean, younger than 60, or younger than 50, just kind of get it. I think there are enough other good quality fast casual concepts out there that we're not trying to invent something. People kind of get it.
So what's the thought about how are you planning on kind of continuing that through the rest of the chain at this point? What's the future of existing stores look like? Do you feel, how do you feel about that?
Well, the plan is to open all future restaurants as fast casual. And then as we go through, capital needs planning, that will be a big part of it. What would a conversion strategy look like? And just how do you balance that with the other capital needs of the company? I do think we'll likely see other restaurants convert from from full service to fast casual. It's not something that can happen overnight because, money's not unlimited. But I also think there's some things we still need to figure out with the restaurant we converted and the one we're going to get ready to open here in a couple months. I think there's a little more to figure out on the labor model, and a little bit more to figure out on the facility and the size of the box and how much to allocate to drive-through, and same with takeout and dine-in. Like the revenue components of our business have changed so radically, not just because of COVID. I mean, they were kind of changing over time because more and more people want the convenience of takeout, right? So those revenue channels were growing anyway. COVID sped that up quite a bit and changed that a lot. So we have, for the most part, we have restaurants that were primarily designed for dine-in, with off-premise being kind of a secondary component, where that's very, very different. So as we think about building restaurants moving forward, I think we've got to think about the fact that drive-through has become a much, much bigger part of our business, and takeout and curbside is a much bigger part of our business, and dine-in isn't as big a part of our business. So how do you, the challenge for us will be how we redesign the restaurant to best optimize all those channels.
So let me ask you this about the new labor model. Does the new labor model really rely on the fast casual format to a certain extent, or does it not? So
no, it helps for sure.
I'm saying that in relation to going back to your existing stores, because if it does rely on it, wouldn't ownership say, okay, we're gonna make an investment in converting a bunch of them or whatever?
Yeah. I think that's why we need to do that work in the one that we converted, to make sure, one, it's as efficient as it can or it should be, so that we can get a sense of what level improvement would you see in the rest of the system if you did that. Yeah. Like when we converted that restaurant, we were very careful in wanting to make sure the guest experience didn't suffer. So we've over-delivered a little bit in terms of the number of managers there and some of the other front of the house labor that we've built into it, because we were very cautious about, one, guests not understanding like the change, but then also wanting to deliver on all those hospitality points in the guest journey. All right, so I think there's an opportunity for us to fine tune and streamline it a little bit, so that we can then evaluate whether or how much of a difference or how much of a benefit there is to going to the new labor model. I feel pretty confident that it'll be material enough to want to backcast it into existing restaurants.
Which brings up a question I have for you about kind of your ownership, of the brand and how supportive they have been. Having your Rourke Capital folks involved. First of all, that was the first time in my career I've ever seen a capital group participate, in unit level discussions and actually be productive. Every single time in my entire career, that end of things has always seemed like they didn't even understand what was going on, let alone, how to participate. So that seemed amazing. So how is that relationship for you? I mean, it's a little bit different topic, but how is that?
They're great. I mean, they're really fantastic. And I'm not just saying this because there's a chance that somebody might watch it from work. No, they really are great. They seem to strike the right balance of involvement or support, and then autonomy. And I like them a ton. I mean, one of their internal mottos, and it struck a chord with me when I was interviewing for the job, and they've really been true to their word, is that they like to be good partners in good times and great partners in bad times. And I've seen both. When I joined, we had bad times because COVID happened.
Immediately.
they were an incredible partner through it. I mean, they hire really smart, talented people because they can, but they hire good people, and they've got a good company culture, and they understand how to be partners and sort of, like I said, where the line between support and involvement and allowing autonomy needs to be. I can't say enough good things about them. Just everyone I've dealt with in their organization, from the people that I work with directly, works obviously a really large PE group, but not so the people that are involved with Jim and Nick, but then also other resources inside that organization that I've dealt with just a couple times, whether it's HR or legal or other folks. So just really very, very smart, very, very professional. And really good folks that just want to help.
Yeah, I can't, I agree. Obviously, I don't have that level of experience with them, but wow, I mean, it was so different than anyone I've ever been involved with. Just the idea that they wanted to participate at the minute level. They really wanted to talk about they participated in a lot of our guest experience discussion. They were on weekly calls, which again, I've never seen that before, and actually had good input and were thinking about what we were doing and talking about it, and adding value, which was amazing. You hired me to work with you on another brand that was probably what was very difficult, relationship I know that you had with ownership, and it really affected the outcome of what we were trying to do because they just didn't get it. They didn't get the level of investment that needed to happen for the end result that they were looking for. And it was incredibly difficult. Board members would call me, and say, well, yeah, we should do this or that or the other thing. Like, wait a minute, I mean, what are you talking about? You're not even involved in what we're doing,
Right.
talking about. So it was just a very different, experience. That was awesome. And, going forward, I imagine from now on, you'll be like, man, you want to work for companies that have ownership at that level that are so awesome.
For sure. It really is. They've been great.
So right now, I mean, we got a little bit more time. I want to, we've had one basically opening. We're opening another restaurant now that we've been working on for several months. You said, hey, let's take this one a bit further, in interior, in changes that we made. There was a building it's in Sharpsburg, Georgia, that was basically half done. I mean, they had basically the shell built, COVID started, and they stopped construction on it really when you came on. Then they let it sit there for several months while we kind of figured out what to do. And then we took a while, to kind of come up with an interior design that took it further. You said, hey, let's take this a little bit further, but not too far. And you've kind of drawn back. I view it as my job to kind of try to press you, to a certain extent. Hey, we need to push the envelope where necessary while not presenting ideas that don't make sense. And I felt like, the proof will be in the pudding when we see it. It feels like we've made the right, kind of extent of changes, and I can't wait to see it. So I'll see you next week. We'll be standing there while they're working on it. And so what new, as we talk about that unit, so we went from the one, are there changes to that unit other than kind of the design? We did push the design a little bit further. What other things are happening there that maybe is the first time?
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned earlier the need to just increase our ability to optimize those the off-premise channels. I think so. Both what we're doing with a physical plant and drive-through, but then also some of the things we're doing with technology and with just internal training on speed and efficiency to just to up our game and drive-through will be different in Sharpsburg than it was in in East Cobb where we converted. And the same thing with curbside service. We'll have just a little tighter, more buttoned up curbside experience than what we have elsewhere. And when COVID hit, we moved really quickly. And sometimes when you move really quickly, the consistency suffers. And so our curbside experience, we're doing it. And hats off to the team. I mean, our people are amazing. But I think we, as a company, we need to do a little better job in supporting how we do those things from a training perspective. So we'll open Sharpsburg with just a little tighter operating standards for curbside. Those are probably the biggest two differences. Many will be the same. Trying to think what else. And as far as the facility and kind of that, go ahead.
I was going to say the technology. We've talked a lot about technology changes, and I've been impressed with your prudence, and saying, okay, we need to look at these things. But then we were talking about just the other day, should we do this, fancy drive-through piece? And while it sounds cool, you're like, I don't know that we're ready for that, which probably made a ton of sense, because you're right. Yes, it's a great feature. Are we ready for it now? Probably needs to be part of a more, thoughtful, maybe technology rollout. What are you doing technology wise now? We've had some interesting conversations, and we went to see a couple of competitors. We went to Austin once, you and I, and visited somebody who was already doing some things. And then we've talked about brands like Bar Taco and other people that are now kind of doing, full digital inside. You started talking about those things pretty early on, in our conversation. Hey, I think, we should be thinking about that. Do you have like a long-term plan, like for technology kind of on paper at this point, or is it still kind of churning?
We're building it internally now. Yeah, it's actually, we're leveraging some internal help and some external help with our work partners to figure out what should our 3 to 5 year technology roadmap look like. We have more things that we want to do than time, effort, money, and bandwidth to be able to do them. Right. So we want to be able to be just, measure twice, cut once, man. Be really thoughtful about what technology we bring into the business, when we bring it in, how it integrates with other systems that we use. And my biggest concern in moving too fast, especially as a former ops guy who doesn't have a strong IT background, is my concern is just adding too many bolt-on technologies that could be obsolete in a short period of time, or that don't integrate well with your current platforms. And we've got some catch-up work to do. I think we're doing good quality. We're doing smart work now. But I think we'll continue to move just cautiously and do our homework and use use resources around us to help us make good decisions.
Yeah, that makes tons of sense. Obviously, I think some of the things we talked about, I'm real interested in, especially the full digital experience is not, but as you said, there's so much other stuff that goes into it, all these bolt-on things. It could be a serious problem. It's kind of daunting. I would think in your position, trying to figure out what vendors to use right now, because everybody's trying to tell you a technology solution, and a bunch of these people are relatively new, and a bunch of them are bolt-ons to things. And with a chain, you've got a ginormous investment in a POS system, and it all has to work with that. And you can't throw that out to put another one in tomorrow without an incredible expense and difficulty. So it just makes it a big challenge. So, you look at some of those chains that are investing so heavily in it. And of course, the folks that did a few years ago are now just reaping a lot of benefits. So very, very cool.
Sure.
Well, that is about an hour. So I've kept you on the phone a long time. You probably got a lot. I imagine your days are filled with.
That's good.
As I know. So I really appreciate your time today. It was really good to talk to you, and looking forward to meeting you next week when we meet in Sharpsburg. We're going to look at a bunch of finished materials that we came up with to try to make sure that we pick the right things. And, as always, if you need anything, please give me a call. So, I'm here to help you.
Yeah, we'll do it.
All right, brother. Thanks.
Cool.
Good to see you again.
Well, thanks for having me, man. Always a pleasure.
Awesome. Talk to you soon.
All right. Bye.